Today, we're going to dive into a really huge idea, one that's kind of sitting underneath everything we do. It's about the simple, but also incredibly complicated act of understanding.
I mean, really think about it for a second. How do you actually understand a book written centuries ago? Or a piece of modern art that just looks like a splash of paint? Or, even just what your friend is trying to tell you over coffee? It seems so simple, but when you really start to pull on that thread, a whole universe of questions just opens right up.
And that is exactly where the philosopher Hans-Georg Gadamer comes in. Now, he believed that this question, how we understand, wasn't just some dusty, abstract puzzle for academics. Nope, he saw it as one of the most central challenges of our time, especially in an age totally dominated by science.
So, to really get what makes Gadamer's idea so radical, we've got to first understand the problem he was wrestling with. What was the standard way of thinking that he wanted to completely turn on its head? For centuries, and especially with the rise of the scientific method, the big goal was always pure objectivity. The thinking was that to truly understand something, like a historical text, you had to become a kind of blank slate. You had to erase yourself from the equation, get rid of all your personal biases, your background, your entire perspective, to find that one single true meaning hiding inside. But Gadamer? He came along and said that's not just impossible, it's missing the entire point. Instead of trying to erase our perspective, we should use it. Understanding isn't like an archaeologist carefully digging up a fossil. It's way more like a living conversation where something totally new is created between two partners. And this brings us to one of Gadamer's most famous and maybe most misunderstood ideas. He uses a word that's probably going to make you wince a little bit: prejudice. But as you're about to see, for Gadamer, this word means something completely different from what you think.
I mean, our common sense screams at us that prejudice is the absolute enemy of understanding, right? To be a good interpreter, a good reader, a good human, you have to have zero prejudice. It's like the #1 intellectual sin.
But then Gadamer comes in and just completely flips this on its head. He says, and I quote, "Prejudices are not necessarily unjustified. They constitute the initial directedness of our whole ability to experience." Whoa! Now, he's not saying prejudice is good in the way we normally use that word. He's arguing that all our pre-existing beliefs, they aren't roadblocks. They're actually the very thing that makes experience possible.
Okay, so here's the key. When Gadamer says prejudice, what he really means is prejudgment. Just think of it as the entire toolkit of assumptions, cultural knowledge, and experiences that you bring to any situation. Without these prejudgments, a new text or a piece of art would just be meaningless noise. They are our only possible starting point.
Okay, so if our prejudgments are the starting point, what's the space where all this happens? For Gadamer, the next massive piece of the puzzle is language. But again, it's not just a tool we use. It's more like the very air we breathe. As Gadamer put it, language is the fundamental mode of operation of our being in the world. That's not just a fancy way of saying we talk a lot. What he means is that our entire reality, how we think, what we see, our very consciousness, it's all shaped and structured by the language we live inside of. You see, we can't just step outside of language to get some pure or unfiltered look at reality. Every single act of understanding, from your most basic thought to the most complex theory, it all happens within language. And since language is, at its core, a back and forth, it makes sense that understanding itself is basically a dialogue. So, if understanding is a dialogue, and we always bring our prejudgments to it, then what's the actual goal? Well, this leads us to what might be Gadamer's most beautiful and powerful idea: the fusion of horizons. First off, what's a horizon? It's a great metaphor. Just like your physical horizon is the limit of what you can see from where you're standing, your historical horizon is the world of meaning you can see from your specific spot in time and culture. And here's the thing. Everything you try to understand, a book, a person, a work of art, it has its own horizon too. So the whole process of understanding becomes this kind of beautiful dance. First, you recognize the world the text came from, its horizon. Then you become aware of your own world, your horizon, with all its prejudices. Then you bring them together in a dialogue. And the goal isn't for one side to win. The goal is a fusion, the creation of a brand new, bigger understanding that couldn't have existed without that conversation.
So what does all this philosophy actually mean for us? Like, in the real world? Well, it changes pretty much everything. History is no longer just a list of dead facts to memorize. It becomes a living, breathing conversation with the past. Art isn't some puzzle with only one right answer. It's an encounter that actually changes us. And maybe most importantly, It shows us that true dialogue isn't about winning an argument, it's about fusing our horizons to find some common ground.
So, when you boil it all down, for Gadamer, understanding is a journey that never really ends. It's not about nailing down the one correct interpretation and then you're done. No, it's about staying in that conversation, always enriching ourselves, always expanding our own horizons, and always learning to ask better and better questions.
Which kind of leaves us with one last, really juicy question to chew on. If all understanding is a conversation, a fusion of two different worlds, can any interpretation ever be completely and totally wrong? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.